So here's a question for you. How does a politician on a public servant's salary end up with a net worth in the multi-millions after just a few years? Well, a recent Fox News report decided to dig into that very question, and they focused on some of the biggest progressive names in Washington. Today, we're going to break down exactly what they found. Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the report's main claim about this big surge in wealth. Then, we'll get into a specific case study to see how they crunch the numbers. After that, we'll zoom out and see if this is part of a bigger trend, explore the major contradiction the report claims to have found, and finally, we'll put it all in a little historical context. So, the report kicks off with a question that's, followed politicians around for decades. But this time, it's aimed squarely at some of Washington's newer, more progressive voices. And it all boils down to this. A member of Congress makes about $174,000 a year. So how does someone on that salary see their net worth climb by millions in a pretty short amount of time? To get to the bottom of it, the report zeroes in on one politician as its main example. And that case study is Representative Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. She's a very prominent member of that group of progressive Democrats you've probably heard called the Squad. The financial journey that the report lays out is, well, it's pretty dramatic. It says that back in 2018, when Representative Pressley was first elected, she actually had a negative net worth. Fast forward just 6 years, and now her assets are valued as high as $8 million. Let's really let that sink in. According to the report's look at her financial disclosures, she started out with a negative net worth. I mean, that's a situation a lot of people can probably relate to. And she landed here with a reported asset value of up to $8 million. So you got to ask, right? How does that happen on a congressional salary? The report claims it comes down to two main things. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of how this wealth was supposedly built, at least according to the source. The report breaks it down into two big buckets, property and her husband's income. Okay, first up, there's real estate. A huge chunk of that valuation apparently comes from some pretty high-value rental properties. We're talking about one on Martha's Vineyard, valued up to $5 million, plus two more in Boston, each valued at up to $1 million. Now, the second big piece of the puzzle, highlighted in the report, has to do with her husband. It alleges that his consulting business and his income saw a pretty major shift right around the time she went to Congress. So here's the story the report tells. Just days before Representative Pressley was sworn into office, her husband reportedly left his job with the city to launch his own consulting firm. After that, his income is said to have jumped way up, and his clients included organizations with ties to the government. The report also makes sure to mention that this did raise some ethics concerns at the time. Okay, so after digging deep into that one case, the report kind of pulls the camera back. It starts to argue that what we just saw isn't a one-off thing, but it's actually an example of a much wider trend. And the pattern they're pointing to is this idea that, hey, personal wealth seems to skyrocket right alongside political power. To back this up, they bring in other members of the Squad and even some of the longtime Democratic leadership. So next, the report turns its attention to another very well-known member of the Squad, Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. For Representative Omar, the report cites a net worth that could be as high as $30 million. And, it hits a similar note. The report points out that her husband also works as a political consultant, which reinforces their argument that there's a pattern here. And to really drive home the point that this isn't some new thing, the report brings in its final example, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who the commentator calls the grand dame of this whole trend. Her net worth, the report puts it at over $275 million. And it connects this massive wealth to her husband's investments in the stock market, basically alleging that he might have benefited from inside information thanks to her powerful role in Congress. So after laying out all these numbers and connections, this is where the report really brings it all together and makes its main point, that there's a huge contradiction between what these politicians say they believe and how they handle their own finances. And this is the big clash they set up. On one side, you have public statements where these politicians are slamming capitalism, but on the other side, the report points to them building up multi-million-dollar fortunes while they're in office. The source presents these two things as just not adding up. And to wrap it all up, the report argues that, hey, even though we've been talking about these specific progressive politicians, this is actually a classic Washington story. It's one that goes way beyond any single party. This one quote from the report really just sums up their whole argument. It's very easy to condemn capitalism when you're making millions of dollars. The criticism is pretty blunt, that the talk doesn't quite match the walk when it comes to their reported financial success. So, in the end, the report really widens its lens beyond just the squad. It frames this whole thing as a systemic problem in Washington, one that it claims happens on both the right and the left. They allege that getting access to inside information is a huge part of it, and they point out that past efforts to fix the system just haven't worked. And all of this leaves us with this one big question, which is really at the heart of the whole report. Is building up personal wealth while you're in public office just an unavoidable part of the American political system? Or is it a fundamental flaw, something that could and maybe should be fixed? It's definitely something that reports like this force you to think about.